Hello, hello, good evening, good evening. Just very quickly, want to just give a brief update. We're going to be kicking off the presentation at 6:15. Just so that you're aware, that's 5 minutes out. We're going to go ahead and get started with the next phase of the open house.
Good evening. If I could get your attention, we'll get this started. Wanted to welcome all of you here this evening. This is the start of a much longer conversation, and so wanted to let you know that there's going to be more opportunity for interaction. This format was specifically chosen for a couple of reasons. One is, in reading through the emails that came into the City Council, some were well-reasoned based on facts. Others, it was obvious that there wasn't an understanding of the facts. And that's not to call someone dumb, it's just the reality of not having information. So that's why we chose this format, so that there could be an exchange of information both directions. And I'll return to that at the end of my remarks. So I wanted to give you that preamble as sort of an introduction. So who am I? Well, some of you probably know me, some probably not. I'm the city manager, Roger Tinklenberg, and I report to the City Council. City Council is composed of 9 people, and 8 of the 9 are here tonight. So let me introduce them for you so that you know who they are. In the back is Mayor Huesman. I think many of you know him. He's been active on social media. And then there's Mayor Pro Tem Alan Thomas, also in the back there. With us also is Rick Davis, one of our new members of the council. Christy Douglas, also newly elected. There. Sean Ford. Megan Grimes. Craig Hurst, way in the back. And Susan Noble. I introduced them by alphabetical order. There's no preference. I'm attempting to not show any preference to anyone, all right? So I have to be careful that way. I'm kidding, I think. All right, there's a lot of history with this development. You know, the start of it dates back to the late 1990s. Shea Homes was the one that initiated it. They basically were the master developer for many years, up until 2017. And that's when Oakwood took over from Shea. And so they are now currently the master developer, but they're fairly recent, only with the development for 5 years. As I mentioned before, you know, there was misinformation that was obvious in some of the emails, and that's understandable. It's nothing to be ashamed of. That's understandable because there's a lot of history here. There's complicated law that's involved with it in terms of the development process. So that's why all of these poster boards are set up, and that's why people from the city staff are here, as well as representatives from Oakwood Homes, to answer questions, to have an exchange of information. So I would ask you, please take advantage of that opportunity for exchanging information. If there are those that want to, give their view, don't want to participate in that exchange of information, simply want to vent, I'm using blunt language here, I'll be available. In fact, we'll go to a separate room and you can talk to me as long as you need to, want to, and we will take notes. So I offer you that opportunity, but again, this event is meant to be an exchange of information. So with that, I will turn it over to Jason Rogers, who is better looking than me, taller than me, but he's my deputy city manager.
Thank you, Roger. I not only like to say I'm only 5'24" tall. So that being said, Jason Rogers, I am the Deputy City Manager over External Services. Just a little bit about that. That oversees community development. That's planning, building, code enforcement, public works. So that's our horizontal infrastructure from storm drainage to right-of-way, roadway projects, Parks, Rec, and Golf, Bison Ridge Rec Center, Eagle Point, Golf Course, economic development, and then obviously other aspects more related to urban renewal or revitalization of, repurposing of development. And the reason why I'm up here before you all, I have a touch point in a lot of the aspects in the areas that we've heard from our community, from the long-term vision for what is reunion and what does that mean for the city, but ultimately as well, where is the infrastructure to support that continual growth that we continue to see, not just only in reunion, but also in the Northern Range. But then ultimately at the end of that, when do we start to see how that culmination of rooftops turns into commercial development to be able to create that live, work, play environment? So what I am going to attempt to tonight, and what I think is very important, is that this, to Roger's point, is only a starting point, not an end point. We are planning and will be engaging with the community as we go forward with the development of Reunion. Reunion is going to evolve and really serve as an image maker for the city as it relates to where we go in the Northern Range and where we go in the Front Range as a community. So it's only important that we serve and use this opportunity as that starting point. And my presentation is really going to hope to achieve that we establish a baseline understanding that all of us, staff, the community, our elected officials, those who we want to work with, can refer back to about the process and how it will play a particular role in the discussions that we have openly and honestly with each other. So first starting off, the city's development process. What is the role, what is the process that we are required to follow under either state law, local governance, our local goals, our local regulations and standards, and or just the constitutional standards that we ultimately have to also compel ourselves to follow. And it first starts with the city's guiding documents. And one is more guiding, while the other one is an act of a police power that we're allowed to put on zoning and land use. But it all stems from the comprehensive plan. That's a framework for decision making. Another way of looking at it, it lays the foundation for the long-range growth, both in the built environment and in the infrastructure in support of creating a sustainable community. It helps to advise, to inform on the decisions of where and how we grow and how we build over the course of a 25-year period. Now, once again, I said it helps advise, it helps guide. Where it really gets teeth is within the Land Development Code. That's where we realize the comp plan's goals and priorities that range from land use, growth, fiscal stability, and also looking at Parks, Rec, and Golf, and so forth, and being able to turn that into regulations and processes that you see that go before a planning commission and city council, because we've taken those priorities and goals and have turned them into regulations and standards and criteria to evaluate, does this meet the test that we have established in the comp plan? Once we've been able to get through that discretionary or legislative review with our planning commission and city council, we then start to move into other land use entitlements. And when we think about that, that's your PUD zone document. I think, as you all may be very much aware, we have a PUD zone document that governs the type of land use, where you can build that land use, how high you can build that land use, how far you have to build that land use off of the road. And that is the Buffalo Hills Ranch PUD. And Oakwood will discuss more about that here shortly. But ultimately, at the same time, we have subdivision plats, which takes property, divides it so that the residential or that commercial has a place to be able to build vertically. And then the development plans and PUD permits are what we realize in understanding visually, what is that building going to look like? What is that housing going to look like? That ultimately also has a level of standards and criteria that have to be able to meet the test that refers kind of back in that, I would like to call upside down pyramid, right? Starts with the comp plan, zoning, development plan, and permits. It all has to feed its way back up to that comp plan vision. Once we get through that, we now turn into the ministerial aspect. That's our building permits, to be able to erect, to construct, or alter or improve the various buildings that were tied back into the development permit, that tie back into the subdivision plat, the zoning, and so forth. So they're connected throughout the entire process and making sure that we're meeting that test along the way. And then obviously step 4, we start to talk about construction, inspection, and occupancy. Kind of straightforward there, right? You've got your approvals, now you go build. We inspect and make sure that what you said, what you've shared as far as the development community is what you intended to build. If not, we make you go back and fix it. If so, we then issue a certificate of occupancy so that we can now start to have people proffer the businesses or be able to enjoy the homes that were intended to be. So that's the land use process. Pretty straightforward, but it can get complex and it can be complicated because ultimately we have to balance that against what can we control versus what we cannot. And some of the things that we can control are where land uses are allowed, which are permissible, which are allowed by conditional use or not permitted. That occurs at the time of zoning, your entitlement. What type and how many residential commercial businesses can be built. Once again, that's at the time of entitlement, at the time of zoning, because that's where we're starting to look at the initiation of all of the impacts that a community will have to understand and then have to work with the development community in being able to offset. So zoning is really that key time where we're really able to get underneath the hood and look at what are going to be the intended impacts by allowing residential, commercial, industrial to build in an area, and how are they going to be offset so that at the appropriate time, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's the timing of other various improvements, are there to ensure that we don't get behind and are trying to play catch up. The size and the design aspects of the type of buildings. If you look at our zoning, and we will make sure that on the reunion page that we put the Buffalo Hills Ranch PUD up so that you all can be able to have the same documentation that we have to hold ourselves to, is that you'll find development standards that will speak to how tall a building can be, how small or how big a lot may be allowed, and the development density within a filing is allowed to be able to demonstrate compliance with the overarching comp plan. And obviously how roads and other infrastructure is constructed or related. And we're going to talk about a development agreement here shortly, but where we see the realization of infrastructure is tied to a development agreement, which on the next slide is a contract that is required to demonstrate that they have mitigated the impacts of their development, in particular for that filing, and the trigger mechanisms in which those public improvements and or cash in lieu of has to be made to the city to demonstrate that they have mitigated their project. A couple of things that we don't control outside of the city's purview, because we have limited scope with respect to land use and governance of development, particularly in and around what specific businesses are allowed within a commercial development. For example, if we're thinking about a retail or a restaurant use, we may be able to say that we can allow a restaurant with drive-through or without drive-through, but we can't prohibit whether that's a McDonald's, a Wendy's, or a Burger King. But we can look at whether or not that restaurant has a drive-through use or not, whether we have a bar or a tavern as such. But we don't get down into the branding or the names of the type of uses that come in. We can't exactly identify specifically which mixed use in a mixed use project has to be delivered. Once again, we're limited to whether it's a retail, a restaurant, an office use, but we can't define particularly whether it is a dental, medical. I mean, to that extent we can, but we can't get down to the particular end user who's going to occupy that space. So there's limitations on how and who we can engage as an end user or limit as an end user outside of the land use. When the development is constructed, we as the development community are also limited to the market. We can identify the rails as to the type of use, how it's going to be constructed on the property per our building codes, our development standards, but we cannot compel a developer to build by a certain time. Now, I will stipulate, if they get a permit for a type of use, that permit has a life cycle in which they have to develop, and if they don't develop by the timing of that permit, they've got to go back and start all over again. And they will be held to the standards of the rules and the regulations that are in place. Partnerships between the developers, commercial and retail management groups, we may have our best interest in trying to partner A with B because of what we may have seen in other communities as part of our efforts in economic development, but we can't force that marriage, we can't force that partnership. We try to encourage as much as we can, but we have to rely on that occurring outside of our ability to control. So as I stated a little bit earlier, what is the development agreement? It is a required contract at time of subdivision that demonstrates the project at hand has mitigated its impacts on the existing environment. Whether that is storm drainage, roadway impacts, they have to demonstrate that based on a technical review of various reports and analyses as they're working their way through our process and demonstrating that they've met the development standards at the time of their zoning, that they've also provided a commitment to the city that they will make a payment in lieu of at X time to address their impacts, and or that they will be constructing certain improvements that have been required as part of their traffic impact study. So it's really important that in that agreement that we are looking through that with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that those impacts have been mitigated and that that timing of which they're to be developed has been ensured, so that as we know that they start to build out, that we can then go inspect and have that as a checklist to be able to go through, yep, they met that, they've met this issue, they haven't addressed this yet. So it allows for us, once again, to hold their feet to the fire. And that's just not with Oakwood, that's with any and all developers who want to develop in the city. We have that as a particular process. So speaking about Reunion's Consolidated Development Agreement, and I'd like to share that Reunion's Consolidated Development Agreement is not novel to the city. The city has entered into other consolidated development agreements with other developers citywide for different purposes. What I will say, what is different, is that the magnitude and the scale and the effect of a consolidated development agreement with Reunion is obviously much broader and much far-ranging because of just the general size of the development. But the concept of a consolidated development agreement is not new to the city. As it stands, the previous consolidated development agreement took effect in 2001, which was under the previous ownership of Shea Homes. That consolidated development agreement was assigned to Oakwood in 2017 when they became the preferred developer with the underlying property owner. And as of December 2021, because we had a 20-year lapse period from the initiation of the CDA that occurred in December 2021. The importance of that is that it created a partnership between the city and Oakwood. And I will be the first to say that the Consolidated Development Agreement was not perfect. It had opportunities to be improved upon, and as we continue to think about how we move forward, to be able to ensure that we're encapsulating what we're hearing from our community and what we're also hearing from our council and those that we want to be able to come proffer from commercial development. So we know that there's improvement and that there's room for improvement, but it did in the early days establish an opportunity for regional infrastructure to support Reunion and the other Northern Range communities that have allowed us to be able to get to this point to really redefine what does that look like for the next generation. So as you may find, roads, sidewalks, drainage infrastructure, park facilities, all came from the Consolidated Development Agreement that was previously in place. And you'll find some slideshows of just showing how that occurred over the years with growth and development. So the Consolidated Development Agreement, and I'm going to shift away from that because it's really a master development agreement for all of Reunion. And with a master development agreement, what are the options that we as a community, as a city, as Oakwood can go forward with? And what you'll find up on the screen for the next couple of options is not an exhaustive list of what we as a community can partner with Oakwood on. it's just like I said, a representative example of things that we're going to be discussing at great length over the next 3 to 4 months and trying to get to some joint solution that benefits the community. But the typical thing that we would do is either an individual development agreement. So that is each individual filing that comes through that we are required to enter into that contract. So for example, we would have Reunion Ridge Filing 1 would have its own development agreement. Reunion Ridge Filing 2 would have its own development agreement. Reunion Ridge 3. Now, with that, we have to ensure that we are meeting the rough proportionality rational nexus test. And what that means is that if development creates issue Y, is providing the necessary mitigation of X. We can't request or compel an exaction that is above and beyond the impact that they are mitigating. So that could take the form of paying a roadway impact fee. That could play the role of dedicating necessary right-of-way, in which we as the city would be required then to construct those regional improvements. Or they would only be limited to certain intersection improvements such as traffic signals, turn lanes, based on their traffic impact analysis. So once again, if it's Y, then X, and it equals Z, but nothing above that. So that's how, when you look on an individual basis, we have to apply the rules and the constitutional standards that are governed by us. Another option is, once again, this thing that I shared about the master development agreement, a different form of a consolidated development agreement. Very similar structure, but once again, looking at it more comprehensively and being able to provide different horizons and triggers and assurances for when certain improvements are going to be delivered and the type of process and how to ensure that that's going to come about. This really allows for you to have a much more regional approach because no longer are you looking at the rational nexus test. It's a negotiation and a partnership with the developer in coming to those compensating benefits for the community, but also for them to be able to continue to move forward with the development in a holistic and a more connected fashion. So for instance, what you may find are widening arterial roads, developing regional detention basins, delivering, for example, a turnkey par 3 golf course, and or being able to assist in the construction of park facilities and or other public facilities that may be needed. With that, I'll stop. Any questions? I know we'll be taking those in writing, but what I want to do is turn it over to Oakwood Jim Hayes to be able to talk to you about the particular development in hand and to be able to kind of go through their overall vision for Reunion, in addition to what has been their regulatory requirement.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Jason. Appreciate that very much. I made my font really large, but I'm still going to have to use my glasses, I guess, tonight. So, first of all, I want to thank you for showing up tonight, and I know there's a lot of people watching online as well. Really, this is a great joint effort between the City of Commerce City and Oakwood. Again, my name is Jim Hayes. I'm the Vice President of Land Acquisition and Entitlements for Oakwood Homes. I've been with Oakwood almost 4 years. I actually spent about 20 years in public service, including 5 years in the City of Commerce City as the Deputy City Manager. So very familiar with Reunion, a lot of the agreements that Jason referenced, and of course the big process that he laid out for everybody. I hope you were able to get some of your questions answered tonight during the open house, but we are going to provide another opportunity to go through some of the written questions that you've submitted either online in advance of the meeting or as you fill out cards tonight. And we're trying to make sure we cover those as best we can. If we don't have the exact answer tonight, I will commit to you that we're going to be posting those answers on the reunionneighborhood.com website, as well as providing them back to the city, because we know there's a lot of material that to cover tonight. You may think of something after the fact as well. I just want to introduce a couple people in attendance from Oakwood tonight. Eric Jones, who is our Denver Division Home Building President. Eric, thank you for joining us tonight. Kelly Lead, who's the Director of Lifestyle Operations for Oakwood Life, and also the founding member of the Stead School. So thank you to Kelly for getting that project moving forward. And then we've got a few of our consultants here tonight, Jeff, Katie, Eddie, Aaron. They were in the back at some of the boards tonight, so hopefully you got a chance to meet some of them. I just want to point out that Oakwood, we're not just a builder of homes, we're a builder of communities. We're very purposeful in building the homes for every level and every stage of life, whether that be an entry level, a move-up buyer, even a luxury buyer that wants to live on the golf course, someone who wants a lock-and-go home where it's maybe no yard, higher maintenance on the outside, those types of things. So again, reunion is very important to Oakwood and very important to the existing and future residents. We want to make sure that we're hearing you tonight and that we're trying to move this forward together. So as Jason mentioned, there's the agenda on the right side. I just want to point out a few things we're going to cover tonight. Number one, a brief history of Reunion. I've got some of that information on that website, again, reunionneighborhood.com. A lot of details about Reunion Center. I had a chance to talk with a few of you back at the board tonight about some of the things that were discussed in prior meetings, even a few years ago. Regional infrastructure projects is also going to be very important to review tonight, as well as schools and the benefits that we're providing to 27J, not only with the Stead School, but some of the land dedications. Quick overview of the Metropolitan District structure. We had some maps back there that hopefully were very helpful. We know there's some elections coming up, so we're going to talk about Metro districts a little bit, and then of course the responses to the questions that you've submitted. So just a quick history, as Jason mentioned, Reunion actually probably started even before the Buffalo Run Golf Course was opened in 1996. Both the L.C. Fullenwider family as well as Watterson and Fair donated land to the city for the Buffalo Run Golf Course. Fullenwider commenced with annexation of the property, again, formerly known as Buffalo Hills Ranch. And then, as Jason mentioned, Shea Properties took over in about 2000, 2001 with that Consolidated Development Agreement. Through 2001 to 2017, Shea did a few amendments to the PUD that Jason had referenced. And the area was also highlighted in the Parade of Homes in 2006, just south of the golf course. And the King Soopers Marketplace, of course, opened 10 years ago now. For those of you that have been here a long time, it's hard to believe it's been 10 years. And as Jason mentioned, we took over as the master developer in August of 2017. Since that time, we have been focusing on the development of the Reunion core communities, if you will, which is really the areas on the east side of the park, trying to fill out the development around the park, try to finish up the construction in those areas where a lot of the prior existing residents lived when we took over. We also initiated, as Jason mentioned, a PUD zone document amendment. Some of you may have been in this room 3-4 years ago. We had an open house similar to this where we talked about some of the changes that we proposed. Essentially, we added cluster homes to the home collections. It was not something Shea had anticipated. Changed some of the lot sizes in some of the filings. Clarified some of the mixed-use zone districts, which could include residential or commercial. And we also tried to clean up some of the things around the Reunion Center zoning. In the fall of 2018, we partnered with Community Uplift Partnership in conversion of the Shea Sales Center, which is a derelict building for several years, to the great Reunion Coffee House that we all enjoy today. Actually got HBA Amenity of the Year in 2019. And then in the first part of 2019, we went through our public hearing process and had the PUD amendment approved. And I would also encourage you to look at the website for a link to the presentation on August 5th of 2019. Mr. Lead and I made a presentation along with representatives from the Metro District about Reunion and trying to complete the community's vision for the whole area. You'll see a lot of information there about one of our proposals for the Reunion Center, which we're going to talk about tonight, and some of the partnerships that we needed to put in place to make that happen. I'm going to skip through some of this information, but essentially some of the meetings we had in late August were with city staff, and then we had another meeting on August 19th to get the new Metro districts created. None of those metro districts have been activated at this point. It's essentially to serve the new areas that we'll be building out over the next 10 to 15 years. I mentioned some of this history. Those numbers up there, the filings may not mean anything to you, but those are the core communities that we're building out and should be finishing up here probably this year and into early next. So since that presentation in late 2019, we spent a lot of time as city staff talking about how that partnership could go forward. We presented some regional projects to the city in the summer of 2020, had a lot of meetings with individual council members in late 2020. And then in early March of 2021, we submitted a letter kind of summarizing all of the partnership accomplishments that we had completed in the preceding few years. Unfortunately, we all know the impact that COVID had on development and restaurants and hotels, and if you have kids in youth sports, what an impact that caused on your life. Well, that caused a huge impact on that reunion center plan as well. There was obviously restaurants and hotels closing, travel was limited, but I don't want to shortchange that by saying that that deal is dead. We are definitely willing to continue the conversations with the city. There's a lot of things to get worked out. It's a complex public-private partnership that we're more than willing to keep those conversations going. As Jason mentioned, we also had the Consolidated Development Agreement. At one point, we were talking about trying to get an extension of that agreement, just kind of as written. But I think we realized after the first of the year that really the complexity of that agreement had changed over time. The land development code had been updated. You're in kind of the second round of another comprehensive plan update. Really warranted us going back to the drawing board and coming up with a new agreement. So we ultimately did not object to having that expire. I just want to mention a couple of things about city council goals. I'm not going to read these, you can read them on the screen, but I tried to line those up with what our vision is for Reunion as well. And really, we believe we are very aligned with some of the city council goals. You can see there about, we want a thriving community. We want to leverage the metro districts to provide efficient and effective levels of service. There's also developing and maintaining that public and private infrastructure. I'll talk about some of those projects here in a minute. Promoting health, safety, and in our case, education as a key tenet of the community. And then including community involvement and creating more trust with all of you. I'm very happy we're able to have this meeting tonight in person and online so that we can really start to, the engagement as we try to move the community forward. Just some development progression. I think hopefully you enjoyed some of the historical slides that were running during the open house, showing really how the community has built out over time. It's important to note that the original PUD from Shea Homes had about 15,000 homes planned for Reunion. And with our 2019 amendment, it's probably going to be in the 10,000 to 11,000 range. That does sound like a lot still. We're about 1/3 built out, maybe about 3,500 homes that have been built so far. And really about 25 to 35% of the Northern Reign residents live in Reunion. So we think the final build out could be another 12, maybe even 20 years, depending on how the real estate market goes. And we know we'll have a lot of boom and bust cycles ahead of us. So here's the overall map of Reunion. Again, each of the villages were shown on the boards in the back during the open house. Hopefully you had a chance to take a look at those and really see where your home was on there, what some of the surrounding property land uses were going to be. And we can reference this map later tonight when we get into some of the questions. I just want to point out a couple of maps in a little bit more detail. This is the Reunion Ridge, basically 104th and Potomac over near Highway 2. Kind of south of Turnberry. We've got multiple builders in there, Lennar and Tri-Point. We're also finishing out some of our homes in there. And we've got some more higher density homes planned on 104th Avenue. And then as you move further south, we have a couple of additional sites that we're planning, probably more third-party builders in there. And I want to point out those two stars. We are planning per our PUD, there will be a school park site dedication from Full and Wider through Oakwood to the city, so that the school district will have another site in that location. And then there's another star on the east side, which will be another school park location, which will be shared with the Anderson property, which is going through the entitlement process right now. This next map, we're really excited about this as well. This is going to be Reunion's first active adult community. So if you see the homes on the northeast side of the creek, that is Chambers and 112th. That is going to be more of a traditional neighborhood, kind of what you're seeing around the east side of the Buffalo Run Clubhouse near the golf course right now. But if you get south of the creek, we've got that planned as a gated active adult community. We'll have a mix of home styles in there, and we're also planning a $15 million amenity for the residents of that community. I think the important thing to note about this one is that this filing will not create any negative impact on School District 27J because it is age restricted. So no students are allowed to live in that community, yet the residents that buy homes in that community will be paying the full property taxes to the district. So it's really a win-win situation. We've got a couple things down there on the front around King Soopers. We're talking with Shay, who actually owns that property west of King Soopers. They're looking at trying to activate the west side of that parking lot with some additional retail opportunities. And then we may do some of our smaller homes, which would not be active adult, kind of on the back side of King Soopers there. All right, Reunion Center. So I had a chance to talk with a few of you in the back there. I'm going to dive into this map in a little bit more detail, but this essentially shows the zoning that is on the property right now. The focus for our 2022 work is going to be all in phase one, which is really down in this southwest corner. The reason we focus down there is largely because of the infrastructure that was put in place by Shay. There's water, sewer, drainage, all of those facilities are there. We're able to activate that site a lot quicker. Focusing on the area directly south of the Stead School, which is going to be a single-family attached product, very similar to what you see on the southwest side of Walden and 104th. And then further south of there, we have as a mixed-use site. So I'm going to dive into that in just a minute here. So again, here's a zoom in on phase one. You can see the distinct areas of development showing the Stead School. There has been a lot of conversation about that area east of the Stead School known as the future commercial site. We'd actually set that site aside for the Rangeview Library District. Mr. Lead and I worked very closely with their architects to plan that site out, have it be very cohesive with the school. Unfortunately, 2 times the residents of Adams County voted down that mill levy. So we do not have plans to build a library there at this point. It would be fully funded by the Rangeview Library District, but we do have it set aside at this point. Hopefully we can still work something out with them, but no promises there if they don't have the funding to actually build the library. So the Stead School. Again, I want to point out that this was leveraging the Reunion Community Foundation, which is a foundation that we set up 3-4 years ago that we pay into, as well as all of the builders in Reunion pay a per lot fee for every home that they build. And those dollars were leveraged then to put a plan of finance together to build the Stead High School. This was Reunion's first high school. It is a public high school chartered by District 27J. The Fullenwider family generously donated the 10-acre site, which was valued at about $6 million. This was above and beyond what was required for school site dedications by the development. We have about $5 million in capital infrastructure that we're working on right now for roads and drainage to serve phase one, which will include that detention area and activating that commercial site down on 104th Avenue. The foundation, again, pledged about $2.75 million towards the independent financing there, about $27 million. The Build Strong Foundation, which is Oakwood's education foundation company-wide, put about $500,000 in the school's startup and ongoing operations. Nearly $300,000 has actually been raised privately as part of the school's capital campaign to support the inaugural year. Welcomed 9th grade students last fall. You see the second building going up now. The greenhouse is operational out there, welcoming that next 9th grade class this fall. Really looking forward to that. This is a view of Homestead Trail, which is also known as 106th Avenue. So if you're at the roundabout and kind of go east of there, that is going to be planned as a pedestrian-friendly street. We worked very closely with the city on the street design so that we can close that off for public events, farmers markets, things like that, big events related to the school. Obviously, we've got to keep it open to get some access to the residential to the south on occasion, but there's multiple access points into that site. And then here's just a general view of what that might look like. This would be the residential on the south side. We tried to take a very urban style because it's really an urban part of the Reunion community. This is a close-up of the plans there that we have. Again, they're going to be single-family attached homes with that urban edge. And really the intent here is that the intensity of the residential development will decrease as you go west of Walden and increase as you go further south to 104th Avenue. And I want to point out, this site was always planned as residential in that 2019 vision that we presented to City Council. It was always shown as phase one, what we were going to do with the zoning for the property. So this is a zoom in of what we're calling Village 1F South. That detention pond in the corner, as I mentioned, will be able to serve where it says future commercial, retail commercial, as well as the area labeled as TC2. We are anticipating that the TC2 site would probably be a multifamily residential site. We've talked with a lot of commercial brokers. They've talked with a lot of end users. And there's less and less likelihood to have commercial that far off of 104th Avenue. We're still open to those ideas, but we definitely want to activate the front piece as much as we can. Retaining the hard corner, what I keep calling it for something great. We don't know what that is yet, but it could be an office building. It could be restaurant pads with outdoor seating. We're wanting to make sure that we don't just do what a lot of developers do and pop a gas station or car wash on that hard corner. We're being very conscious about what we want to have something be great at really the entrance to Reunion. Right now, I think ultimately that's going to be the main and main of Reunion as the city continues to grow to the east. So I think this map is important to see because obviously there's been a lot of discussion in recent months about the vision that we had for Reunion Center back in 2019. So we did a design charrette in 2018, and we identified, along with a lot of experts that we met with, that the site would not support a lot of retail without some kind of demand driver, such as a major employment user, and in our vision in 2019, a sports facilities concept. The ball fields concept, which you can see over there on the right side in the purple, this was based on the idea of exchanging a portion of land that we had set aside for a regional park near 96th Avenue and 2nd Creek. One of the ideas was that rather than having lighted ball fields down next to residential, we would potentially have that property suitable for some development adjacent to the new high school, and that this property would be taken out of taxable production, it would be put into a regional park, and the revenues would be from fees using the fields. The Sports Authority complex or concept that we talked about with the city then would manage, operate, maintain that facility. Really, that was always intended to be our demand driver, which would then bring in those hotels, restaurants, and so forth. For any of you that have kids in youth sports, you've traveled around the country at all, you know how the things pop up around these big sports facilities. There's a lot of hotels. The Chick-fil-A always pops in there, right? Those are the kinds of things that we were really trying to drive here. Now, we understand from the city that the land exchange proposed back in 2019 for that property may no longer be viable, but so there just needs to be a different financial structure in place if we're going to do something like this. But the framework of all the districts that we created in 2019 are in place. We have a sports authority drafted. As you'll see on the graphic I'm going to show in a little bit, there's an opportunity then for the city and Oakwood to serve on that sports authority board to manage and maintain these facilities. So I think the bottom line is, that our proposal or vision for Reunion Center has not necessarily changed, but it's evolving, okay? It's not a commitment that we made back in 2019. It was a proposal, it was a vision. Definitely always required a partnership with the city to make that happen. And I'm going to provide a few more slides to give some additional context about the Reunion Center and some of the trade area issues that maybe some of you have not heard about before. So when economic development professionals look at development of commercial sites in the community, they look at trade areas. And the next graphic I'll show talks about the different types of uses, whether they be restaurants, big box retail, what kind of trade area and what kind of criteria these people look at when they're making these site selections. So there's a 2, 3, and 5 mile radius around the property. And you notice that there are a lot of constraints here. There's the National Wildlife Refuge, there's the noise contour for DIA, there's Bar Lake, and at the northern edge of that 5 mile radius is the Prairie Center, where a lot of us shop, right? And there's a lot of retailers that have already landed there. So it really did take some of those opportunities away. However, I think the important thing to note is that we still have a great opportunity with the traffic counts here, with the amount of residential that is being built, the proximity to the airport. I think there's still a lot of opportunities here. We just have to help create that demand driver. So again, I'm not going to read all of these. You can look through those, but I think it's important to note that, when you look at that aerial history we provided, housing always happens first in a community. Then you get these various stages of retail that come in. I think the first thing you see is the 7-Eleven or the gas station, right? Then you get the fast food. Then we get these sit-down restaurants. And it's like a pyramid. And at the very top of that pyramid are the unicorns, like the Costco and the IKEA and the movie theaters and things of this nature. So I think, I could say that we are actively marketing those pad sites for development right now on the west side of Tower. But, we do not operate restaurants or grocery stores, but we're looking forward to really help drive the demand that we can get some of those users in here sooner rather than later. So a lot of discussion about infrastructure improvements in Reunion when we took over in 2017. And frankly, we believe the city, or the community, I should say, was behind with respect to infrastructure development. I can personally attest to that when I was working for the city, that there's some things that probably should have been completed coming out of the downturn and just weren't by the prior developer. So we will also believe that we're sincerely catching up. We're not there yet. We know there's a lot of work to do. We believe the master development agreement will include a lot of those infrastructure projects and the timing to get those completed to the city's satisfaction. I did want to point out just a lot of the things that we have done. I mentioned the coffee house, the high school, the long-awaited South Lawn pool. That's something that Shay should have completed. We went ahead and completed that project. A lot of parks in the area. We've been actively designing the Second Creek drainage basin. As you know, that area between Chambers and the rec center floods out. We're looking at how we can possibly work with the city to get that drainage working a lot better. A lot of active design has been going on there. We made a lot of improvements in Reunion Ridge. That ragweed draw that goes through there, actually that didn't even exist when we started out there. And we're actually retaining water at a higher rate and volume than is historic to help some of the downstream flooding through Turnberry and all the way towards the railroad tracks and the river. And then finally, I think 112th Avenue, I think that was a great example of a project that we were able to complete in partnership with the Reunion Metro District and the city to really get that piece of road done. And we're hoping that that can be used as a model for finishing out 112th east of there, as well as Chambers Road. We know those are two high priority projects as identified in some of our recent public hearings. So this is a comprehensive list showing some of the projects we've identified with the city really about a year and a half ago. We had some dollars associated with it. And I'm not going to go into the details other than to say this is about $174 million worth of projects. And those numbers are probably 3 or 4 months old. And we all know how the inflation's been going. And This takes a lot of oil to build these roads and put the pipes in and so forth. So it's probably north of $200 million now to get a lot of these things done. I think the important thing to note is that, the master development agreement, we're hoping is going to outline not only what the project is, when it's going to be completed, what the financing structure would be like, whether it be city, metro district, developer, combination thereof. We really want to leverage all of that ability together to try to get some of this stuff done. I would just point out Chambers there from 112th to 104th. I know the city has actually asked the engineer for the district to assist with extending that project north of 112th all the way to 120th, including a signal at 117th. So that's going to be another important extension. And then, of course, on the right side there, the blue is High Plains Parkway. That has been on the city's transportation plan since, I think, about 1999. And so it's really going to provide an important north-south connection, kind of cut the corner, and then tie into Buckley at 120th. So again, this shows that $174 million. I just want to point out there's a whole bunch of different sources that we can use for financing this. And those are the kinds of things that we're going to be working through with the city. And you'll see here a lot of those abbreviations may not mean a lot, but as part of the 2019 districts that we created 16 additional metro districts that have not been activated yet. And we look at the ability to bring in a lot of the new residential communities as well as the reunion center to help leverage those assessed values that are going to be created to build out a lot of this infrastructure. This is just a conceptual vision of Chambers Road. Some of you may have seen this before at one of our public hearings, but the green section there is the section of 112th on the right side that has been completed. The west side is really contingent upon solving the drainage, but then Chambers Road in the pink, I'll just hit a few highlights of this. One of the ideas we're looking at is a cart path that would go from the Buffalo Run Clubhouse to connect over to the Second Creek drainage area, and then ultimately to the active adult community. There would be an underpass there. There would be a new signal at Heartland Drive. There would also be an underpass at Second Creek. I think it was a 180-foot clear span bridge, so we don't have to mess with any of the wetlands or any of the plant life down there. It'll just go straight across, keep the trail underneath it. And then also down at 106th Avenue, just north of the Platte Valley medical offices there near King Soopers, that would be a signalized intersection. I think all of us know how hard it is to take a left out of there sometimes, and so that would be a great improvement to that area of the community as well. Quick comment on schools. So Shea had dedicated some land as part of their development for not only South Lawn Elementary, which is now just being constructed, but also Reunion Elementary. This shows a lot of the schools in the area, and I wanted to point out a couple of things that we're going to be working on. Number one is a new high school site down at 96th Avenue and Reunion Parkway. We've actually are very close. We've got the legal description created, title work done. We're going to do some environmental work before we transfer that property over to the city. And then there'll be that site for a regional park right next to it. So about 110 acres altogether is going to be dedicated to the city so that the school district can get that building going. You'll notice in yellow, that is a 2021 bond approved school. So they're very anxious to get that site under their control so they can start the design of it and get the project moving forward. And then there are two other sites that I mentioned previously in Reunion Ridge, one kind of at the end of Potomac Parkway, roughly 100th Avenue, and then that other one that kind of overlaps the Anderson property. There was going to be, that one in the middle there on the left side was actually going to be over to the west a little bit, but because of the drainage area over there, it really wasn't in the center of the neighborhood. This is a much better location the school district preferred. So we're going to be working with the staff to get that site identified and hopefully transferred this year if we can. So just a couple final slides on metro districts, and then I think we're going to transition to some questions. So again, metro districts, the relationship here between the Reunion Metro District and North Range Metro District 1 through 5, okay? This is a structure that was set up by Shea over 20 years ago. It's very similar to what they did in Highlands Ranch. And Highlands Ranch has a mill levy equalization across all of their districts. So they did the same kind of thing here, so that no matter if you were the first home buyer in 2003 or the most recent home buyer in 2022, you would pay the same mill levy across the entire community. Right now, District 1 and 2, those are controlled by homeowner boards. That is the structure, so that after a certain period of years, those transition to full homeowner control. North Range District 3, which is largely filing 37 near the golf course, and Reunion Ridge. Oakwood still sits on the board, but we anticipate those will be transitioning to homeowners by 2023. North Range 4 and 5 are actually still controlled by Shea, and they still have property in Reunion on the southeast side of 104th and Tower, and they're using those for their commercial districts. So those do not affect any residential properties. I'm not going to get into the details of the bond structure and so forth. Largely, we're going to take questions. I think we'll make sure we run those through the Reunion Metro District staff. But essentially, there are some refinancing options, I think, that the Reunion Metro District has that can still fund infrastructure. And I'll leave it up to them how they're going to be able to manage the debt service mill levy long term. I think the important thing to note is that, the operating mill that is collected by the district, it's really used to maintain facilities, open space, landscaping areas throughout the Reunion community within the budget that they have. There's a lot of residents, I think, that want a higher level of maintenance. Some don't want to pay as many in taxes and would like a lower level of maintenance. So it's really going to be up to the Reunion Metro District Board to make those decisions. This next one shows the mill levy breakdown. And again, all of these presentations are going to be available to the city on their website, as well as we're going to post this on reunionneighborhood.com, so you can take a look at this in a little bit more detail. But essentially, you see all of the mill levies that are collected by the various taxing entities, and then what a sample home value would be, $400,000, $500,000, $600,000, and how much that would be in taxes. This is a map of the metro districts 1, 2, 3, and 4. Again, there's a map in the back there if you want to take a look at that. But essentially, the green is District 1, the pink is District 2, and the purple is the newly formed District 3. So my last slide, believe it or not, right on time, I think, Jason. The next one shows, this is a list of the new districts that were created by the City Council in 2019, approved by the city. As you see, there is no what I call the parent-child relationship. So the intent here is that each one of these districts would be fully controlled by homeowners over time. So this is different than the structure that Shea set up back 20 years ago, where you have the Reunion Metro District and the subordinate districts. The idea is that as we activate each one of these and bonds are issued, then the residents will control their own destiny in each one of these districts moving forward. I do recognize that there's some questions probably about metro districts I'm not going to be able to answer tonight. So again, I don't represent the district, but we'll be able to send those along to the staff and hopefully work with getting you some answers to that. I do want to point out one thing. You see the Reunion Sports Authority. Again, this is a separate entity that would be part of the Reunion Sports, Entertainment, and Cultural Metro District. So again, getting back to that ball field and sports complex that we were talking about many years ago. So thank you for your attention and your participation tonight. I appreciate it. Look forward to answering a lot of your additional questions.
And before we transition over to the Q&A, I just want to reiterate, we have the city manager. If you would like to have a more intimate conversation with him, he makes himself available. One key thing I would like to recommend to those who are at home, but also here, we do have at the bottom of the Reunion webpage, and we do have a QR code that will take you directly there, either on the agenda or will be back on our screen at the end of this meeting, is a feedback form. And I would encourage all of our participants here today, at home, or even going to be reviewing the recording afterwards, is to fill out that feedback form. That feedback form will be very important for us to distill information about your thoughts, your comments, the community's needs, that we can present to our council as to what we're hearing from the community. And we will also put that theme and that distillation on our website so that you all have that transparency of knowing and seeing what we're also providing to our council. So I encourage you, go to the reunion webpage, fill out that feedback form so that we can start to understand and appreciate on a much more higher level what we're hearing from our community needs that may be able to help with some of the decision-making discussion in around Reunion Center, Master Development Agreement, and other aspects that we may be able to control. So with that, we have questions that we will start to read off. Obviously, we will take them as they come. But the first question I have, and we'll try to do my best representation on behalf of the council and of the city. Question for City Council. Walmart has owned property in Reunion since 2007. Walmart has been paying mill levies since 2007. Why hasn't City Council pushed Walmart to build and open? That's a great question, and I think it goes back into property rights, as we understand and as we know. As the city can encourage the development of particular property, we cannot compel, we cannot force a private property owner to develop their land as such. We do our best to encourage, and I see that the mayor may be coming up to respond or not. Thank you, Mayor. Just give me a nod. Nonetheless, we cannot compel a property owner to build. Now, I think that's an important role that we play in economic development. In our economic development staff, we are always engaged with our property owners, whether it's a residential developer or a commercial developer. And we try to incentivize them through various means to want to build their property. Now, sometimes we're successful, sometimes we're not, because they have their own business model and program that they have to rely on to determine is it the right time or not. But I can commit that we do remain engaged with them on a continual basis to see whether or not we can strike when the iron is hot and then when the market has an opportunity. But that's the role that we play as the city.
All right, I've got one that came in the last couple of days, and I think it's related to one we just got tonight too, which was what was the unworkable project structure that caused Reunion Center to be infeasible? And that was similar to a question we received a couple of days ago, which was, did Oakwood send a letter to the city in 2019 stating that the Reunion Center's development was no longer feasible? So I think I want to point out a couple things there. We did not send a letter in 2019. It was the one on March 1st of 2021. And the intent of that was to summarize some of the accomplishments in our partnership to date since we took over as the master developer. So in late 2019, early 2020, I think you probably just started at the city, we entertained a prospect together, the city and Oakwood, to jointly construct a field house property right north of 106th Avenue, east of Tower. And the city and Oakwood collectively decided that that project was infeasible. It was going to require a lot of infrastructure from us. Of free land, I think, was part of the deal. They wanted a bunch of hours committed by the city to operate it. And so it was important to note that in that letter because we learned a lot of things about what it might take to execute an agreement with a third-party operator like that. And we actually put in the letter that we thought it actually clarified the framework for some future negotiations that we could have on the property. So I think that that specific user was determined to be infeasible. But as I mentioned tonight, I think we've got some opportunities here where we can continue talking about this and trying to move this forward. I think just one more, and I'll hand it back to you, Jason, that was related, was why was there no mention of a land swap until just recently to build the Reunion Center? And I think, you know, I would encourage everyone, if you want, to go look at that August 5th, 2019 City Council meeting. It was a very comprehensive presentation. It talked about the land exchange. Now, we know a lot of things have changed since then in terms of, you know, what the city may want to do, funding they may have available. But that was actually one of the first ideas that we had for trying to develop the Reunion Centers, essentially shift that regional park up to the Reunion Center. So it was always an idea that we had back as recently as 2019.
Thank you, Jim. Next question I would like to read is, during the April 11th special meeting, Councilmember Noble asked if city council members attend the monthly meeting with city leadership. Oakwood said no. Can we start having city council members attend the meetings for transparency? So there's two parts to that. That particular program leadership meeting that we have with Oakwood is to discuss the technical review of a variety of different entitlement applications and or various projects. The purpose for that is to ensure that certain deadlines and other requirements as it relates to that review are being conducted within a timely fashion, and or if there are questions, we're allowed to have those conversations on a real-time basis. As it relates to council member participation, we have to be mindful of ex parte communications, so discussions with council members outside of the normal process of a potential project that may come before them. So involvement at the stage of where they are not making a decision that could eventually come before them, we have to provide that level of protection and separation of the review of the process. So ultimately, for example, we may discuss a subdivision plat as it relates to the technical review with different aspects of the reviewing and referral bodies. Ultimately, a subdivision plat could be called up to City Council to undergo a public hearing process. And I'm playing out a scenario here. The particular reason for that is that then Council will become the final decision-making body on that application. If they participated in the review and the discussion around those applications, it could lead to a recusal of them being able to participate on making that final decision. So there is a separation or a checks and balances as to allowing for the conversation to occur if issues can be resolved. If not, then if it gets caught up, allowing for the council to have that conversation and to then make that determination.
Thank you, Jason. See, I've got a couple that are related, and then I've got one on Reunion Ridge specifically I think I'll take. So one is who funds the Reunion Sports Entertainment Cultural Metro District, residents or private? And then there's another one is that came in a couple days ago. We were told the Reunion Center was 100% developer funded. Is that not accurate? So first of all, no, I would say it's not accurate that we would, the developer would 100% fund that. The proposal back in 2019 would be for a public-private partnership between the city of Commerce City and Oakwood, the metro districts, and the financial structure was not really finalized at that point. But I can tell you that the intent behind the Sports, Entertainment, and Cultural Metro District is that that would not be paid for by existing residents or even future residents. The idea behind that district is that it would be based on a revenue bond model as opposed to property tax mill levy. And so how that would work is very similar to, say, how a water district issues bonds, right? They're going to receive revenues in from their users, and then they're able to issue debt to build infrastructure. So the idea behind that is that sports facilities would have revenues coming in from users, from gate fees and things of that nature, and then that would be able to be leveraged to issue bonds to build the infrastructure, build the facilities, and so forth. So that was the concept behind it. Again, the financial structure has not been finalized, but that was the idea. One specific question on Reunion Ridge was that Reunion Ridge is slotted for 4,000 plus homes. How is this going to impact the rec center and pools when no additional structures are planned? So great question. Right now, it's actually about 2,600 homes in Reunion Ridge. So one of the things we have planned is about a 3-acre site right to the west of that school park site that I mentioned. We have right now, this is about a 2-year-old budget, but it's about $10 million budget for a recreation center, outdoor pool, sizing maybe similar to South Lawn. We're not really sure at this point, but that is what we're planning down there, is to have another full amenity for Reunion so that all the residents of Reunion could use that one or the one at the Big Red Barn or South Lawn. It'd be all part of the same community. All the facilities would be available for everybody.
Thank you, Jim. I'm actually going to read a question that I believe both Jim and I will answer combined because we've received a number of these as well in advance of the meeting. How does the developer plan on filling the void caused by leakage in the northern range. And a question that we also received that's very similar to this is how will the city leverage tax incentives to attract new investment in business in Reunion? So from a city perspective, when we think about trying to fill the void of economic development and leakage in the northern range, we leverage tax incentives, we leverage other creative deals and opportunities of trying to create, once again, those partnerships between the developer and potential end users. Our staff will travel the country in various conferences where you will find various nationwide or regional retail restaurant brokers and or end users that we will take various properties, in particular the property at 104th in Walden, forward to those end users and try to position that property from a level of interest. Now that's our encouragement, and then we leverage various tools in the toolkit, whether that be sales tax use sharing, in which that end user will put into the community to be taken back out by them for stabilization as they start up, or to look at how we create compensating benefits for commercial development that will be able to help offset some of the infrastructure burden or costs that will be placed on them just with what we're seeing in the market today. Now, that is just a snippet of the tools, not the full breast of what we are always looking to evolve and to develop here in the city. But we play that role of working with a developer like Oakwood, understanding the property that they have, the intent and the vision, and trying to help when we are on the road at various shows, conferences, or engaging in end users, trying to position those properties to be able to leverage, hopefully, into a real market and seeing something pop out of the ground.
Thank you. That was a great answer. I think, a couple of things that we're looking at is we recognize in talking to end users through our brokers or directly with some of the things we're doing in Green Valley Ranch that exorbitant mill levies does serve as a bit of a deterrent, right? And so we recognize that there may need to be some creative structures we put in place, and I think that's why we've been very, very careful not to put mill levies on Reunion Center yet. By comparison, the King Supercenter is in North Range Metro District number 2. And it has been paying into that district for quite some time. As I noted, there's some properties on the west side that have not developed yet. So I think that's an important lesson that we need to be mindful of. One of the things that when we look at these various users that may want to come into the community, we try to identify what are the gaps, what are things that are not here yet, what are things that, whether they be chains or whether they be local owned businesses, what are those types of holes that we can try to fill, right? I think we've done a pretty good job of that and various things in Green Valley Ranch. You're going to see a lot of things coming out of the ground down there here because it's a much more mature community, if you will, in terms of how long it's been around. But we're going to take those same kind of models and try to do those same things up here. Work with our brokers, aggressively market the sites where we have infrastructure available. And then I think, the other thing about the master development agreement and whether it be tax incentives or things, one of the key tenets of that agreement was there was a 1% sales tax rebate in that 20-year agreement that really helped get King Supers to come to Reunion. The city actively marketed that site for 7 years down at the retail convention, and then finally 2011 they decided to break ground. So I think it's those types of things where we can partner with the city, identify these key sites, like I said, not chew them up with gas stations and car washes, and try to preserve some of those areas for something really great that we can all be proud of.
Next question. Why does the city offer areas of land as multi-use to Oakwood without designating something strictly for commercial use in order to prevent a blank slate for developers? That's a very good question, and this ultimately goes back into the timing of entitlement for development, which sets the course of it over the build-out or the lifespan or life cycle of that. Once again, everything goes back to the timing of zoning. Zoning is when we establish a particular land use, that is commensurate with the comprehensive land use designation or vision for that piece of property, and identifies the type of uses that are allowed. What you find with the PUD as it relates to reunion is it has identified various areas for mixed-use development. And in that, it allows the eclectic use of either residential, commercial, or even office-type uses, but it doesn't compel a developer in a mixing or being able to solely do commercial. And that ties back into, once again, at the time, the comp plan vision when the PUD was first approved in 2001, and then subsequently amended 5 times over that 20-year period. So while there may be an interest and an intent to being very specific to that property from a zoning perspective for commercial, we have to abide by what the PUD allows for our analytical review and recommendations that are made to the city council to determine has it met that test. Now, that is the development review answer to this. Going back to the economic development perspective is where our staff tries to work with that developer in positioning not just Oakwood, but all, if we have that context, because I will say this, discussion around mixed-use development is not germane to reunion. We have a number of our PUDs in the northern range that have this makeup of allowing a variety of uses within a mixed-use parcel. At the time of when most of our PUDs, with where we find this context, were approved in a period of time where the market was still trying to define itself in the late 90s, the early 2000s, prior to the recession, of how you create these place-making opportunities, these opportunities where people can live, work, play, and walk to all of these amenities. But we did not know at the time, from a planning perspective, how that was to come about. So it was built and provided in a form and a manner that was fluid, that would allow for that flexibility. Fast forward 20 years, I think we're in an environment now where we can be more specific and more detailed and desirous of how to actually trigger a true mixed-use development, and or really looking at areas within that mixed-use area to be purely commercial. So, you know, hindsight being what it is, we're leveraging what we've learned in the past to help try to guide future and how we go forward in the future. But we cannot, I would say, control fully what that developer does because of what's been approved in the past.
All right, I got a couple here. One was regarding how is Oakwood funding schools? And I think the bottom line there, first of all, is we don't fund schools directly. Ultimately, when homes are built and businesses are developed and property taxes are paid to the school district, they can leverage those dollars along with the per pupil revenue that they get from the state to build schools. However, the things that we have been doing is making sure that we are dedicating the land that they need for those school sites. That is our obligation, not only in the PUD, but in the Land Development Code, to make sure that we comply with the comprehensive plan vision and that we identify those school sites in partnership with them and with the city, and then we dedicate them to them when they are ready to be built. I look at, unfortunately, Southland Elementary was dedicated, that site was dedicated a long time ago, and they just got the bonds passed to actually build that school. We are actively proceeding with the dedication of the high school site down on 96th Avenue. I think that's a really important next step so that they can get that one built. And as I mentioned, we're going to actively pursue getting the land dedicated for Reunion Ridge. Now, I would say this about Oakwood in general. We have built about 20 schools throughout all of our master plan communities down in Green Valley Ranch, the E.V. Dennis campus, Banning Lewis Ranch, other communities. Mr. Lee, deserves a lot of credit for putting that whole project together down there in E.V. Dennis. There's about 2,300 students down there. It's like a college campus. And Denver Public Schools is not ready to build that site, right? So we went in there and we took an active role in trying to get that project moving forward many, many years ago. And that was really the model for Stead School, is that we knew that Reunion needed a high school, and that Kelly worked very hard with the School District 27J to make sure that that was a district chartered school, first of its kind in the nation in terms of the agriculture and food science curriculum. I think it's going to be a model, and really, I think it's going to attract some economic development there. I think once the continuing word gets out of the partnerships with National Western Center and Colorado State University, there are going to be businesses that are going to want to locate near that school. And even that could be an employment driver to create a lot of the commercial and retail that we're looking for out there. So in short, we don't build schools directly, public schools like that, but when we see that there's a need, we know that that's an important thing that we need to partner with the local school district and get those kind of things done. Next one is, where is the water for Reunion coming from? I like this one a lot. So there's a 20-year-old agreement with the Farmers Reservoir and Irrigation Company. Councilmember Ford knows this deal very, very well. The South Adams Water and Sanitation District partnered with city and a bunch of developers about 20 years ago to secure the water for the Northern Range. The most economical deal that could have possibly happened for the provision of water up here. There was a 20-year option agreement on that water, and developers were given the option of taking that water down year after year after year. Some chose not to. Some ended up going away in the Great Recession and were not able to do it. Thankfully, Shea was able to do that throughout the time. They were the master developer, and we completed that last purchase in 2021. Because we had reduced the number of homes in the PUD from 15,000 down to 10 or 11,000, we did an exhaustive analysis of, the maximum possible density of Reunion Center, like 8 hotels and 10-story apartment buildings. I mean, just ridiculous amounts of density out there, and we still had enough water left to actually sell water back to the South Adams Water and Sanitation District for another 1,000 homes. So we still have some in our portfolio that we are retaining just in case, but that was actually then transferred to the Reunion Metro District in their new water enterprise that they set up last year, so that the water for the full build-out of Reunion is held by that local government, and that we're able to take down that water as we need it. And the Reunion Metro District will actually charge us a higher price for that water as it escalates in value over time. So I can confidently say that there is more than enough water for the build-out of Reunion. South Adams has an extra 1,000 homes that was able to be sold back to them essentially at the market rate that they were paying for other water. And then we have some additional water in our portfolio. So thank you for that question.
Thank you, Jim. Question I have before me is Reunion Center, northwest/northeast of 104th and Tower, is currently zoned for mixed use, including residential and cluster, higher population and home density. Would the city consider modifying the zoning of this area to ensure its development for non-residential purposes, restaurants, offices, athletics? So this is somewhat of a complex question, and I will try to do my best. So first and foremost, there are 3 ways in which a property can be rezoned. One is by 2 ways. The property owner would like to change the zoning on the property, or the city council direction of staff in modifying a action of rezone. Now, I will share this with you is that when we've looked at a direction of council changing zoning on a property, it's been more on the citywide basis as opposed to a particular property. And even within a directed action by council as it's related in our land development code, you ultimately still have to look at providing a zoning that is commensurate with what's already been approved with a development. So it has to be a like for like. And I misspoke. It's actually either council or an action taken by the director of community development are the 3 roles. But regardless, whatever zoning is in place has to be commensurate with what it is going forward in any future zoning. So what we have, I would say, tried to encourage is more specific planning when working with the developer on actions and what we're hearing from the community and taking that into consideration. Or if the developer is hearing from the community, he or she or they may take that action and wanting to be more specific in the development plans, or even submitting an amendment to their zoning to try to capture that. As a follow-on that I think is also suited to it is, will the city commit to not rezoning committed commercial development? That was promised to residents by Oakwood. Once again, a developer, a property owner has the right to seek a rezone of their property. That is just part of the property rights in general. We have to conduct our review with respect to, does it meet the test of the comp plan, of the other various requirements within the land development code, and provide that recommendation. We do not have the totalitarian authority of saying, no, you cannot rezone your property. We still have to take it through its due process and allow for the decision makers, which it comes to that legislative matter, being city council.
Thank you, Jason. Want to hit a couple of the questions that came in over the last couple of days, and I think they kind of blend in with some of the questions we're receiving tonight. I'm actually going to read a couple of these, and I think you'll see that we're going to give kind of one answer that I think addresses a lot of the questions that were submitted here. So, I think one of them, sir, is if in 2019 it was decided that the project could not move forward in its entirety, why did Oakwood keep selling this project as a go when selling the houses? Another question was, my decision to purchase in Reunion was contingent upon an Oakwood promise that the Reunion Center and its associated amenities would be quickly constructed and ready for use. Why is Oakwood yet to deliver on this commitment? And then another one, what are the current development plans for the proposed recreation spaces, ballparks, ice rink, movie theaters, et cetera? So as I mentioned during the presentation, we are evolving the vision. There are no finalized plans at this point, nor were there in 2019. I think the idea that we were still, if you will, marketing that vision. We believe that up until the land exchange concept was maybe a little more tenuous in the last few months, we still believe that that was a viable alternative. I think the impact of COVID-19 really put a pause on it for not only for us, but for the city. There's been a lot of dynamics, obviously, in running the city government, and obviously our issues in trying to still deliver homes to the community. So, all agreements with our homeowners are clearly put in writing in our disclosures. We may have had some marketing materials that still promoted this, but I would say it was a proposed vision back in 2019. I think that only until recently did we realize we really need to change and evolve that vision, moving it forward here. I think one of the other things, just to clarify a couple of things, why have the pandemic and its associated supply chain issues impacted the Reunion Center development, but not Oakwood's development of single-family homes? I can tell you it did impact our ability to develop single-family homes. We've had rising labor costs, supply chain issues, lumber has gone up 40%. And so we've actually started to reevaluate our business model earlier this year about not as much, more just-in-time delivery as opposed to selling a home, building a foundation a few months later, and then closing a home maybe a year after it's sold. I think that it is important to note that, as Jason explained, the land entitlement process to go through with the city right now is taking 15 months, 18 months to go through a long process. Sometimes it takes us 12 to 15 months to get the land development on the ground before we can actually start building a home. So it may look like that we're continuing to press forward with a lot of developments and so forth. We're actually trying to get those entitlements in place, those legal abilities in place. But we have slowed down in some of our home building because of the supply chain issues. I think I mentioned some of the specific users that were impacted by the pandemic, and so I won't necessarily reiterate those. I think there's another question here, and I'll hand it back over to Jason. Is the builder open to self-funding the Rangeview Library? I can tell you that we were working on the land piece of it, much the way we do with schools and parks. The challenge there is that if there's no one to operate the library, it's not really within our purview. I think we're more than willing to continue to partner with the library and trying to get something done there. But it absolutely needs an operating funding source for them to operate that, and more likely for the capital construction as well.
Thank you, Jim. Next question I'd like to read is, why are more homes being built when what we really need are more restaurants, entertainment options, a grocery store, and also things like hospitals, more police presence, etc.? That's a great question, and I would say it is truly a balancing act. And in our field, what we always hear is more rooftops will lead to commercial activation. One of the things, as I've chatted with our economic development team, is that we are on the precipice of becoming a economically distinct market for commercial activity, given that currently most of our population, as it relates to the service areas, are being consumed in an aggregate with Brighton, for example. So when we start to see the growth of us in the Northern Range and our proximity to Brighton, right, the development community from a commercial standpoint is looking at, well, I could be better suited being more centrally located to Brighton because we have an emerging population in the Northern Range. So as we continue to build out, that is some of the pull and push that we're dealing with when we're engaging end users, is that we are trying to tell the story that we are distinct, that we are growing, and that over the last 10 years, where we've seen that, I will say 298% growth year over year in over a 10-year period has been in the Northern Range, and that will continue. So as we sell it, we want you all to be the first ones in the door, help to establish that market, be catalytic in being able to pull the other aspects. But it ultimately is also, as part of their formulaic approach, they're looking at that rooftop, they're looking at that densification, they're looking at that discretionary spending that comes with that population base that helps to entice and to intrigue them. So I would say it's definitely a balancing act of how we look at the growth of the residential with how we start to target and continue to target and leverage what we're seeing to being able to hopefully get them in the door and see the opportunity that we do and not be viewed as a part of another market, but as our own distinct one for the Northern Range.
I was going to comment a few things on the Master Development Agreement. I've got a lot of questions on that. Traffic issues, I've got a few questions here that have come in on that. Before I do that, I wanted to mention that we've got a stack of Metro District related questions here. And I've scanned through some of them. I think my commitment to all of you tonight is that I do not represent the Reunion Metro District, but that we will be taking those and giving them to the Reunion Metro District staff and helping them with, any questions we can answer on there, but then also making sure that we're giving comprehensive answers to those Metro District questions. I will say that, I do serve on North Range Metro District 3, and that the Reunion Metro District, as well as District 3, have been engaging with representatives from District 1 and 2. So we are having those conversations. We are trying to identify, the infrastructure projects, which will be a good segue into the Master Development Agreement, and the Mill Levy structure, right? It's important that we have those conversations with those elected board members, and I know that's going to continue with the new board members that are going to take over in May. So I just want to let everyone know we're not ignoring the Metro District questions. We're going to work on getting some answers to those. So I got a few questions here. I'm going to try to answer them with maybe one answer if I can. How does Oakwood plan to accommodate new Reunion residential construction / residents with new public infrastructure projects? Another one is, are there plans for a new consolidated development agreement? Traffic in Reunion is incredibly congested. How are you mitigating expected additional traffic issues? And then residents are especially concerned with traffic on Tower Road, Chambers Road, and 104th. I think those are all related. So I'll answer and I'll let Jason chime in here. So our intent is, to, as I mentioned, to negotiate a new master development agreement with the city. The Chambers Road IGA, the Reunion Metro District engineer who's here tonight, has worked on plans for the widening of that road. We are working with the engineer, or the attorney for the Reunion Metro District, to draft up an intergovernmental agreement similar to what we did on 112th Avenue. Get that in front of the city staff. I understand the Reunion Metro District Board may actually be looking to approve that as early as May. Get that in front of city staff. They can present that to city council, and hopefully we can get that financing structure in place for Chambers specifically, and then get that project under construction as early as next spring, 2023. Related to the master development agreement, I had mentioned before that we're working with the city staff to identify that complete list of projects that I showed on the screen. I attended the public meeting on the 11th where the city talked about drainage impact fees and traffic impact fees, and there was a top 10 list of projects there. We believe that we can partner with the city on a lot of those things that benefit Reunion as well as the Northern Range. I think the important thing to note there is that we're really hoping to make a lot of progress on that master development agreement this spring and into the summer. So then, rather than doing those individual agreements that Jason referenced in option 1, every individual filing, kind of a disjointed approach, we would have truly a master agreement in place that we could keep everything moving forward. I think, the bottom line is that we're continuing to focus on development paying its own way, whether that be building out arterial roads, or in the past, paying traffic impact fees if the development agreement is not in place. But I think that is our intent all the way along, is have development pay its own way and to try to catch up on the infrastructure that we know we're a little behind on. So,
To speak more to the traffic congestion and what we as the city are doing to try to help alleviate some of those pressures, you all may be familiar that over the course of the last month and a half, City Council took action on 2K Cinderella bonds. And in that, a couple of projects were identified in the Northern Range, in particularly between Tower and what will be to Chambers, will be the widening of 96th Avenue to a 4-lane section. What's in addition to what you heard for Chambers Road from 104th is that we're actually going to carry the full build out of that roadway beyond 112th, but up to 120th Avenue. So those will be 2 significant full build out projects that will be constructed, and we are required to have those constructed by the end of 2025. Our staff is already well underway with securing the appropriate design firms so that we can begin design and then ultimately then work into the construction phase. To the point about partnership, some of these are obviously regional improvements, and in that we are, I would say, inadequate with respect to the impact fees that we've collected. We are also undertaking an effort that will be increasing the impact fees that are collected with each individual home and or a square foot of non-residential for us to be able to try to complete that regional network. But with a master development agreement, we would look at a partnership of cost infrastructure participation or splitting of the costs for those improvements so that we can be able to build out the more regional network, whether that is Potomac Street, Potomac Parkway, High Plains Parkway, and the remaining aspect of 112 east from Parkside to Tower Road, as there are certain areas on the north side that are outside of the control of Reunion to be able to construct. So we have multiple ways and tools that we will be engaging over the course of trying to, once again, continue to build out these various improvements to benefit the community.
just checking to make sure I got all my questions here. All right. I know there's another question that came in, and unfortunately the individual's not here tonight, but it was a question that came up about, could Oakwood explain the purpose of open records requests on city council members and the request for council members to recuse them from land use proceedings? I think I have a pretty simple answer to that. Number one, I want to say that, we're looking forward to the renewed partnership with the city council, the staff, in trying to move the community forward, build out infrastructure. For those of you that know anything about Oakwood, we have a very large company, and when we have zoning in place, we believe we have certain property rights, and that there were some concerns about some of our legal team that our property rights and our due process rights were potentially being violated. So, not going to blame the lawyers, but I'm going to blame the lawyers a little bit, in that, we were advised to try to uncover any stones, if you will, to see if there was any violation of our due process rights. So that's the straightforward answer. Want to be transparent about that, but I will reiterate that we are looking forward to our renewed partnership with the city in trying to get projects moving forward, both public infrastructure projects as well as the individual filings that we have planned under our zoning, and that we have demonstrated with the staff that we are compliant with our zoning, and that we meet all of the criteria in order for staff to recommend approval to the city council. So I appreciate the question. I know that's a difficult answer. We've had a very positive evening tonight, and I wanted to end on a high note. So I'll turn it back over to Jason, and then maybe we can conclude with some of the boards in the open house.
Thank you, Jim. I will want to recognize that we just did receive a comment card with respect to furthering the discussion around Metro District, so I want to acknowledge that. I will say if you have more intimate questions with respect to the Metro District and would like to have that conversation with Reunion and or its representatives to ensure that you get those answers, you'll be able to have that at the boards. But what I would like to take right now is, once again, thank everybody for coming out, listening to the presentation. This is being recorded. It will be put up on the Reunion webpage. We have the feedback form. We would love to receive your information. But now I'd actually like to invite the mayor up front to be able to give some words as it relates to tonight's event. I appreciate your comment, sir, and I would still advise you, if you would like to have that conversation with him, you'll have that moment.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Thank you, everybody who came out, especially to all the residents. Greatly appreciate you coming out here and taking time out of your busy lives in order to come here and participate in this town hall. One thing I'd like to know, though, is there anybody here that asked a question short of the Metro District that did not get that question answered this evening? Is there anybody that asked a question? You did? You wanted to tell me what the question was?
I just wondered if there was going to be a chance that we could get a post office on the north side of Commerce City.
Post office is obviously controlled by the federal government. Unfortunately, right now, the post office is not in the business of building new post offices in areas that already have an established post office. The chances of getting that, I would say probably slim to none, and slim is probably on its way down to the post office that you have to go to. I wish I could give you a better answer. It's just reality. The post office is in dire straits. As it is, they're cutting down on the amount of times that they'll, deliver mail, things of that nature. It's not going to happen to get a new post office in northern part of Commerce City. Okay. Who else had a question?
I noticed one of the slides that didn't get a lot of time was the question of mill levies and how much of a percentage of our mill levies go towards debt service and other bond issues. And I'm wondering, when does that debt service end? That was 30% of our mill levies. When do we get out from under that?
It's a good question, and I think that that's one that the Metro District should be able to answer for you. If you look in the service plan says that you can have a 40-year cap from the time that the mill levy is initially imposed for the purpose of paying that debt back. And so you would go back to, when was the mill levy initially imposed? That would be 2001, 2002, Mr. Lead? When was the bond mill levy initially imposed on Reunion residents? Who has that? When was the bond mill levy initially imposed on reunion residents? Let's say for, actually, I think if you go back and you look at the service plan was approved in August of 2001, and the mill levy, I think, kicked in about 2003, 2004 maybe, and so if you look at 40 years from beyond that point, that is what the service plan put out there as a limit of when those debt mill levies could be imposed to. Anybody else have a question? Yes, sir. Does Oakwood own any of the junior bonds that are being paid back by residents? Okay. Yes, Ms. Becker. Do you need the microphone or can we hear you? Okay.
I submitted a couple of questions online, and one of them was, are there any plans on the city's part to consider some amendments to the land development code with some citizen input so that you can revise some things like that 300-foot notice requirement when a lot of times the developments are occurring in areas where there are more prairie dogs and tumbleweeds than there are houses in the 300. And it seems to me that there's a lot of citizens that are concerned about various developments and are, I would say, entitled to have notice and be considered more entitled in being considered. And I do thank you very much, the city council members, in terms of filing 38 and what you did in the context of those kinds of things. But it's basically a question about plans to consider some amendments to the land development code. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Great question. So two-part answer. One, we are currently doing our comprehensive plan. You've heard about that. The comprehensive plan is the long-term vision that'll take what the city's going to look like all the way out to 2045. As far as the land development code updates go, Monday night we approved $500,000 for the city staff to go out and get a firm to start rewriting the land development code and put forth changes that have been identified that need to take place. Now, Mr. Rogers has said that they can slowly start phasing in some of the more important changes that need to take place, but we're going to hire a firm to come out and do that for us. Great. Yes, sir. So the question was, can the city take all the questions related to Metro District and write them down and give them to Oakwood so that we have them as a record as well? Yep, Mr. Rogers says we'll do that. What's that? Yeah, we'll take care of it, okay? All right. Any other questions that didn't get answered? Great, well, thank you. Yes, sir. All right, to paraphrase what he said for the recording and at home. Mr. Pauly is appreciative of the fact that we had the town hall this evening, expressed frustration in the fact that this is not the format that he was hoping that the town hall was going to be in, and wants to know what steps are going to be taken to make sure that the communication continues between Oakwood, the city, and the residents going forward. Did I get that?
So, Mr. Polly, I appreciate your question, and I think I hinted at it earlier, but I will try to be a little bit more verbose in my response right now. The city is committed to having a long-standing engagement with the community on the matters at hand, whether that is through sharing of information as we receive it and presenting it in a digestible format for all to be able to respond to, having community meetings and engagements where we can have, I'll say, open, frank, respectful conversations around the matters from a baseline of information that we've all agreed to and being able to move forward. We will, as staff, be working on a long-range strategy to bring to the community and bring to our council so that we have buy-in and how we move forward in engaging our residents.
I agree.
There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers, Mr. Hayes. Any other questions that didn't get answered that anybody has real quick before we wrap this up? All right, again, I want to thank everybody for dedicating your evening, your Wednesday night to come out here and also watch online. Greatly appreciate your involvement in our community. Want to thank all the council members who are here, the Mayor Pro Tem who is here as well as all the city staff that is here that was helpful in putting this together. And of course, thank you as well to Oakwood Homes for participating in this. And hopefully this is the first step in actually moving forward in the direction that many of us would like to see it go. So thank you all. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Tinklenberg to close us out. And you guys have a good night and drive safe going home, okay?
Well, as the mayor said, thank you very much. Appreciate everyone participating. Again, we'll stick around. We have the message boards up, and please take a look at them and engage staff right there to answer any additional questions that you have. And then look forward to additional events. So thank you. Have a good night.